Pig butchering. That's the rather unappealing name of one of the costliest online scams of 2024.
Yeah, it's a terrible name. This is a scam where fraudsters build trust over a longer period of time, sort of fattening up their victims, so to speak.
That's our guest today, fraud expert Tammy McKinnon. And she says what's new and particularly potent about pig butchering is that it's a combination of a romance scam and an investment scam, usually involving cryptocurrency. It begins with the scammer luring someone into a fake romantic relationship.
But the change here is that the scammer, at some point, starting to identify that they have an investment where they're actually making good money, and they are trying to convince you to give money for that same investment. It may not be the most frequent scam that we see, but it is one where individuals can lose a lot of money quickly.
In fact, according to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, Canadians lost more than $310 million to investment scams alone in 2024. And those dollar figures are on the rise across the board.
Yeah, the headline here really is there's been an explosion in fraud. Worldwide, there's been a disturbing increase.
Tammy is Senior Vice President of Global Fraud Management at Scotiabank. And she's back on the show to bring us up to speed on the latest scams and to give us 8 simple tips for how to avoid falling victim. Because these days, with online fraud becoming more sophisticated, vigilance is key.
The fraudster only has to be right once. You have to be right every time.
I'm Stephen Maurice, and this is Perspectives. Tammy, welcome back to the show. Always great to have you on.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
So we're going to get into some recent scams people should know about. Also some tips on how to hopefully prevent our listeners or their family members from falling victim. But first, I just want to ask about sort of the demographics. I know we talk about how seniors are often the main target of scams. Does that continue to be the case?
I would say anyone can be targeted, but we do see seniors being targeted. They are particularly vulnerable. This can be a result of isolation. Maybe they're less familiar with some technology. They tend to be victims of particular scams like grandparent scams.
Right. Okay, well, let's get into the scams. We talked about pig butchering in the intro, but another one I wanted to ask you about is QR code scams. QR codes are those square sort of barcode-like boxes you see that you scan and they point your phone to a certain URL or website. Can you tell me about how scammers are using those?
Yes, there's a new term for QR phishing known as quishing.
Oh.
This is a type of attack where scammers are using QR codes to trick victims into either revealing personal information or sometimes you're scanning that code and it's installing malware on your device.
Right. So you're out somewhere and you see something that interests you and there's a QR code there. So you go to scan it with your phone, but a scammer may have printed off their own code, stuck it on top of the original one, and so now this code sends your phone browser somewhere nefarious.
Yes. So, for example, if you're in a parking lot, this has happened to me. You go to make your payment for your parking. You want to be sure that if you're looking at a sign and there's a QR code to scan, that someone hasn't put a sticker over top of it, because that could indicate that it's a bad QR code, and once you scan it, you might be infecting your own device.
Oh, I see. Okay. And I'm sure with Taylor Swift's massive Eras tour coming through Canada recently, ticket sales scams were on everybody's radar, but I'm sure it's not something that's gone away or is likely to. How does that work? What was the issue with that?
Taylor Swift tickets were difficult to get. So the trend was scammers were using counterfeit tickets, either sold online or in person. And the victim didn't realize that they were not legitimate tickets until they showed up at the venue. In some cases, they were even scamming and selling tickets that they weren't even in possession of.
Right. I remember reading a news story about something like that here in Toronto, where a mom spent more than $3,000 for tickets to the show for her and her daughters from someone she thought was just another mom, and it turns out that person didn't even have tickets.
Yes.
There were quite a few stories like that, and there may continue to be with other big ticket events.
Very disappointing, but that's how it happens, yes.
Okay. And before we get to our tips, what's loyalty fraud?
Loyalty fraud or rewards point fraud is sometimes the way we refer to it. Think about anywhere that you get rewarded with points. Hotels, any kind of travel that you're doing, or credit cards, right? This is where you're accumulating points that you can redeem for goods or services.
Right. So there have been cases where people have had all of their points? I mean, they build these things up over a long period of time, save them for a trip or whatever, and people have been cleaned out of those?
It has happened. Yeah.
Wow.
So these need to be protected like anything else that has value. Just like your bank accounts, you want to have strong passwords, use two-factor authentication. You also want to be monitoring those accounts to make sure that your points are not being depleted.
Right.
All the best practices that apply to managing and monitoring your bank account apply to your loyalty points. They're a form of money.
Okay, now we're going to get into the tips because that's the important thing. We talk a lot about different types of fraud, and the important thing really is how to prevent that. So you got a bunch of them. The first is create a code word. Now, we've talked about this a little before in a previous episode, but can you break down what that is, why you need it, how it would work?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very helpful thing. It could be a word or a phrase, something that is memorable to you and those around you, but difficult for others to guess. If you have this code word and you're used to using the code word, it can identify a flag, a red flag. If somebody isn't able to answer the question of what is that word that you've selected or phrase, which is how you can identify if somebody is an imposter. This can be a very, very helpful tactic for people. Once you decide on it, once you have that shared amongst family, friends, and contacts, you should even practice it just to make sure that everybody's comfortable knowing what it is and comfortable to use it.
Okay. And would you be able to give us an example of a circumstance in which that would be the thing to do, would be to use that code word?
Often scammers or fraudsters are calling, impersonating someone. Grandparent scam is a great example.
Right.
Fraudster is impersonating a grandchild. If you have that code word, code phrase, it's a very quick way for you to identify, is this an urgent situation or is this something where I can stop, hang up the phone, and contact my grandchild and confirm whether it really was them or not. It's just a very effective red flag if someone can't answer that phrase.
Right. So that would be in a circumstance, and we've talked about this in the past before too, scammers using AI are able to reproduce somebody's voice and pretending to be that person using AI, and clearly they wouldn't know what the code word is.
Yes. Having a code word or phrase is just another way to help identify that there may be something not right.
Okay, the second one, and maybe it's a little bit related to what we were just talking about, the second tip is beware of deep fakes. Now, that's when people spoof voices or photos or even videos of loved ones. It's what we were just talking about. And it sounds pretty hard to prevent. So how can someone even tell if what they're encountering is fake? Is it possible to tell?
Well, first off, I agree. It is definitely getting harder. These technologies allow fraudsters to become more and more accurate, so to speak. So my best tip here is use your expert judgment. Look for small discrepancies. So if it's audio, for example, you may hear some idiosyncrasies in the sound of a known voice, something that just doesn't quite sound right. It could be a strange pattern or background noise. If your gut says something didn't sound right, that's an opportunity to step back. And similar with photos, take a look at things like lighting and shadows. Those could be indicators. And I'd say trust your gut. If something doesn't seem right here, step back.
Yeah. And I guess even maybe like the words that they use, like they might use a word that they wouldn't normally use or an expression or something, like just have to be very aware.
And it could just be one word that sounds off, or it could just be the way that word sounds that you say that just didn't sound right.
Right. And I guess that's a situation where the code word could come into use.
Yes.
I mean, it's scary, particularly with video and photos, how sophisticated it's gotten and how much harder it's becoming to detect those things.
It's hard to know what's real and what's not.
Yeah. Like, do you have to explain even what a deepfake is and the capabilities that these people have, that scammers might have? Is it a good idea even to just explain those things to maybe of older parents or kids for that matter?
Yeah, for sure. The technology has become quite sophisticated, but it's also readily available. So we see fraudsters leveraging technology that can disguise their voice, can disguise their look, can make them look like somebody entirely different. If you were to do a video call with someone, for example, again, you have to be on such high awareness.
Right.
You wouldn't think it's fraudulent to look at, but just know that it is possible that someone else has gone to a readily available, easy to access website to have this ability to change the look or sound.
Okay, well, the next one maybe could help with that. And so the third tip is slow down.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, scammers create a sense of urgency. That's how they function.
Right.
So I think in just about any type of scam, if you slow down, you signal to them that you're not an easy target.
Right.
That's a really good first step. But I think when you slow down and you have a dose of healthy skepticism, it also allows you to think through what some of those details are or red flags that you might be seeing.
Right.
It really gives you a moment to think. And it's highly recommended that you do that. If it's a legitimate ask, most people don't mind waiting until you're able to continue, answer a question, maybe make a call back.
Yeah.
Those are all things that we recommend. But just remember that scammers don't want you to stop and think.
Right. And I guess someone who's legitimately calling you, they're not going to be putting on that kind of pressure, right? They're not going to be
That's right.
saying, I need an answer right now, or you need to do this immediately.
That's right. And they're often understanding if you need to hang up.
Right.
And call back at the legitimate number. For example, with a bank, the number that's on the back of the card.
Right. Yeah, they'll be fine with you going and consulting with somebody else or whatever and make a decision. There's not that many decisions that need to be made right
That's
now.
exactly right. I mean, I often like to ask people to step back and think about something. Just the action of stepping back and thinking about it helps bring some clarity to the situation. It gives you time to talk to somebody, a family member or a friend, to say, does this sound right? Outside perspective can be very helpful in identifying that something just doesn't add up.
Okay, next one, number 4, limit what you share on social media.
Yeah, fraudsters are always looking for more information on their victims. And through social media, they're able to get access to things that personally identify you. This means that they could use the data to target their phishing attack, for example. If you're posting pictures while you're on vacation, they know you're not home.
Right.
So they could be sending you messages regarding a burglary, for example, which you're not going to be close to because you're off enjoying your vacation somewhere, and it could make it seem more real. So be very careful about what you're sharing online, who your connections are, and again, follow all of those good practices about safety and security.
And so generally, would it be better to just kind of make our accounts private so that only the people that we know can look at it?
Different platforms offer different levels of security.
Right.
I'd recommend that you go in and take a look at what can you enable, but generally more security is better.
Right. And I guess also whatever you post of yourself, whether it's pictures or video that has audio, that also provides them with the information they need to create the deepfakes as well, right?
Yeah. You need to be cautious about everything that you're putting out there, so to speak.
Okay, number 5, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So basically, if they're pitching whatever it is, a cryptocurrency opportunity or whatever, quick money, as a rule, is hard to come by.
Yeah, and you have to stop and think about where you are first finding these opportunities. You know,
Right.
Often scammers are out there on social media platforms. So you have to think about where you're first seeing the opportunity. If it's through someone you know, how well do you really know them? We often will hear of people who have been scammed from someone that they say they knew, but did they really know them? Maybe they had an initial contact with them, but did not truly know that individual.
Right. Which is kind of the subject of the next tip, which is always verify the people contacting you.
Yeah, I mean, a good practice is deal only with individuals who you know. And if it's someone that you don't recognize, validate through the company's website. Again, check with family or friends, but do your research. Do your research before you trust them.
It's become a lot harder, like with phishing attempts where they're sending you to a website or whatever, and it's ostensibly that of a legitimate company. Scammers have become much better at creating fake websites that look like real ones.
Even to the trained eye, the subtle differences can be very difficult to detect.
Right.
So you really have to be on guard when you're looking at a site to look for anything that looks unusual in the address. The site can mimic a legitimate site.
Right.
So looking at the URLs is really important to see, are there any extra letters or numbers or anything that's off from the legitimate site. This requires a fair bit of focus to make sure that you're on the right site.
It's incredibly hard just because like we live so much of our lives online. You have to be so careful now. Like it seems that there's just perils everywhere that you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next one, monitor your accounts.
Yes. So you must be monitoring accounts. When it comes to bank accounts, you need to be signed up for notifications so that you're being notified if anything changes on your account. You can be signing up for info alerts and fraud alerts so that you're the first that gets notified if anything changes or a transaction perhaps that you didn't do yourself. So yes, you need to be monitoring your accounts. And that pertains, as we said earlier, to bank accounts, loyalty accounts, anything that has value, you need to be protecting it.
Right. And those would send you a notification anytime there's, say, a transaction over a certain dollar amount, or how do those work?
Sometimes you get your choice when or how often you get notified, but whatever your comfort level is, I'd say the more notifications you get, the better you can monitor your account. It may be a transaction. It could be that you've changed your address, changed your password. I think almost every site that you deal with within banking or outside of banking, you get these options to be notified. And I generally think that they're helpful because they bring it to your attention immediately and you can address it as quickly as possible.
Right. And in terms of monitoring your account, I mean, should you be like going online and looking at your account and the transactions on your account like once a week, every day? What's a good amount of monitoring to do?
I would recommend that you're typically going in at least once a week, if not more frequent, but you're keeping an eye on any kind of suspicious activity.
Right. So any unusual activity on your account, maybe a withdrawal or something, or a payment to a business that you don't recognize or something
that's
like
right.
that.
Anything like that, immediately act on it.
Okay. And the last tip is educate yourself. So aside from listening to this podcast, obviously, what other resources do you recommend that people take a look at in order to educate themselves better about the threats that are out there?
Banks have great resources. So Scotiabank.com/security is a great place for people to go.
Okay. What is the main takeaway that people should have from this conversation?
The main takeaway is the importance of being vigilant, continuing to be skeptical, step back when you need to, take your time. The fraudster only has to be right once.
Yeah.
You have to be right every time.
Tammy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephen.
I've been speaking with Tammy McKinnon. She is Senior Vice President of Global Fraud Management at Scotiabank. The Perspectives podcast is made by me, Stephen Maurice, as well as Armina Lagaya and our producer, Andrew Norton. For a transcript of this episode, as well as other stories, insights, analysis, and thought leadership, visit our website, scotiabank.com/perspectives. We'll see you next time.